Hello everyone, and welcome to the second special live streaming session this week, which is being broadcasted on the occasion of the new amendment to the Public Procurement Act in Slovakia. As you can see, I'm not speaking Slovak or Czech. We will hold this seminar in English due to our guest, special guest. My name is Ivana Ondruchová, and I'm the trainer and administrator at Proibis, and I hope you are all doing more than well, and especially nowadays. And thank you for joining us today. The aim of this week's special sessions is to bring to you, our audience, information from a different point of view, depending on our guest fields of expertise in public e-procurement, and also to follow up on our last year's broadcast series dedicated to the theme of the amendment, since it's just came into force last week, precisely on the 31st of March 2022. During our session today, we would like to, with my guest speaker, Miguel Sobral, who I will introduce to you in a minute. Miguel, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Ivana. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're more than glad that you are joining us today. What we will like to do during the session, we would like to broaden your perspective on public e-procurement and on the practice of using the e-tendering platforms within the EU member states. And we both hope that you will enjoy the next almost 30 minutes with us and find it useful. But just before we get started, allow me a little housekeeping. For those who would like to address any questions which might come up during the session, please use and do not hesitate to contact Miguel Sobral via email, as you can see it on your screen. And as we talk to each other, Miguel will be more than happy to reply as soon as is possible. Let's jump right in, and let me introduce our guest speaker today, Miguel Sobral. Miguel is joining us today from Portugal, where he's also based Vortal, a worldwide leading company in e-sourcing and e-procurement solutions, and where he is the chief executive officer and drives the company's strategy and execution. Miguel has over 20 years experience in the business software industry and has extensive experience in software as a service strategy, as well as network-driven business models and monetization. But also, more important, Miguel is a member of the expert group on e-procurement within Europe Commission, and a chairman of EUPLAT, which stands for the European Association of Public E-Tendering Platform Providers. That was a brief introduction. And can you please, Miguel, give us a few words about what EUPLAT as an association was working on it or still is? What's the scope of the association and mission?
Happy to do that. EUPLAT was created with the mission of sharing the experience of the different private e-tendering providers across Europe, and sharing that experience, especially near the Commission, where the strategies for implementing public procurement were being decided, and also discussions related with standards, with interoperability. So our goal was basically to share the common knowledge and try to positively influence the strategies that the different countries were implemented across the years.
Digitalization in public procurement is a big topic within EU member states for years. the first direction was in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, and what was more important that from October the 18th in 2018, the responses on paper to EU public tenders issued by cities, provinces or universities and so on were no longer allowed in any EU member state, meaning that each country has to have a certain tool or platform to be able to go digitalized. Only few countries, Portugal or the Netherlands, for example, went by the mandating 100% model of e-submission 2 years earlier in 2016 and implement the directive. For this, a platform, a reliable and trustful platform needed to be implemented, and we have a great opportunity to have someone who went through this and has his experience with that, which would be, of course, Miguel Sobral. And I wanted to ask him if he can briefly give us a little short overview of the history of implementing such a platform in Portugal. So the history and the state at the moment.
Yeah, I'll try to do it very, very briefly. So actually, Portugal was the first country mandating the utilization of e-tendering platforms for all type of procedures and for the submission of proposals, and that happened in 2008. That is when the legislation was published. And the reason was because the country was was not one of the most advanced transposing the previous directives. So when the country transposed the previous directives, it went a bit further and decided to start implementing e-tendering. And the reason was because the country already had platforms operating in the private sector that were already being used by contractors, for instance, in the construction industry, but in different other verticals like the health sector, that were being used to launch tender, to receive proposals, and to make the contracts. So the government realized that there was established marketplace already created. So the idea was to regulate that market, to make sure that it was compliant with the specifications of the public procurement law. So it created an entity and a decree law that basically defines how the platforms should comply and what certifications they must have in order to operate in the country. And so once a platform has that sort of certification, they can start operating in Portugal and supporting both the public entities and the economic operators. On top of that, the country also decided to create one repository of data, which is the portal baz.gov.pt, which is basically a portal where all the platforms must publish all the contracts that either are being noticed, are being published, or the awards that in the meantime were done. So independently of what platform is being selected by the contracting authority, all the data is placed in one single portal that allows eventually, it is based on open data, so every entity can take advantage of that data and make analyses, make its own analyses, makes reports. And that's of extreme importance if you want to know, for instance, the amount of spend by category of spend, by type of procedure, by public body, the number of suppliers that were awarded by a specific public body. So the level of transparency increased dramatically with this architecture. Just to finish, to say that this model that is 100% based on private platforms contributes significantly for the innovation, because the platforms are competing for the procurement bodies, based on functionality, based on new services, especially trying to facilitate the adoption, not only from the buy side, but especially from suppliers, and especially from the small and medium-sized companies, which are the most important ones for the public procurement when you go below the thresholds. And this is exactly the market that we want to address. Because the large contracts, those everyone pays attention. The big corporations, the big public bodies, everyone pays attention to the very, very large contracts. But we know since the beginning that most of the advantages of e-tendering is if we go below the thresholds to the local administration, for instance. This is where we have thousands and thousands of contracts on a weekly basis that can be shared among a very large number of companies that, as of today, are not aware of that, because in these processes by invitation only a very restricted number of companies are aware of that. So we believe that one of the missions of e-tendering and e-procurement is exactly to increase significantly the number of companies that are competing for public procurement. And this is a job that private companies do, because of course they want to have more transactions, they want to have more customers, and so they act as an enabler and they push for the adoption of the technology, which is something that if it was the government pushing for that, at the end of the day it would not happen, because the drive is not the same.
I am just referring to the current situation in Slovakia since the amendment to the Public Procurement Act went in effect last week. One of the many changes which are going to be is that it's going to be mandatory to use for certain contracts below the threshold and above a central e-platform, which is going to be created by the government, the state, and no longer will be the chance for the contracting authorities and the entities using the platform to choose between which of them will they use. Because so far it was that there is one central possibility, one platform, but also there are other providers, private providers, so each entity could choose. The reason why I'm saying that is that even though there were from the public few notes to this when they were working on this bill and the amendment, that maybe this is not the right way to go, referring the trends in Europe regarding to the centralization and decentralization of such platforms. Can you perhaps tell us more about other countries within Europe? Because if I may refer, for example, to Poland, where we also have a market and have experience, that so far there is a similar model as it was before the amendment in Slovakia, that there is one central platform which they can decide to use, the contracting authorities, but also there are others, private providers which provide other option. Do you have any knowledge about how is it in other countries, perhaps?
Well,
as a chairman of UPLAT, yeah.
Definitely, yes. I would say that the competition in every market is something that generates innovation, generates better services, and eventually it will bring benefits for the ones that buy, the contracting authorities, and eventually the economic operators. So every measure that as a result reduces the possibility of competing for something will reduce dramatically the level of services and the quality of services that are available in the market. From my experience, well, there are a few countries that have single platforms, and those are typically the ones who at the beginning didn't have established marketplace of e-tendering platform providers operating, and that is more frequent in Central and Eastern Europe, because in all the let's call Western Europe countries, we have examples where there are government platforms, let's say this way, some of them free of charge, but they are operating in competition with private platforms. So it means that the public bodies are able to decide whether they want to use a solution free of charge or to select a platform, a private platform that eventually will have a subscription. And the point is that you have used the example of the Netherlands, but there are other examples in Spain, for instance. And in those cases, the private platforms are getting traction and are growing significantly. And the reason is exactly because those companies had to find ways of differentiating from what is being offered for free. And what is offered for free is the basic services, is what is explicitly written in the legislation. And the tendering and the procurement, and especially when we are dealing with thousands of contracts in a very large number of categories of spend, is a huge source of data, is a place where you can generate a lot of automatisms that facilitate the launch of tenders, but also the submission of proposals. And so on top of that, the services, the support services that you provide to companies, because if you want to make public procurement more inclusive, if you want to make public procurement engaged with more small and medium-sized companies, you have to have people that is looking for them, supporting them on a daily basis. So our experience in Europe is that the most successful countries implementing e-tendering is where there are private platforms operating. The most advanced ones are for sure the ones where we have a private marketplace of platforms, like the UK was one of the first ones. We have Portugal, that was the first one operating, where we have 100% of public procurement being supported by private platforms, and all the data is concentrated and is one of the countries with better visibility over spend, even if we are using private platforms. You have the Nordic countries where there is no such thing as state-owned platforms. And even in the countries where we have state-owned platforms, like in Germany, like in Austria, like in Spain, there are private platforms competing, and they are launching new services and delivering innovative services that eventually allows them to differentiate. Let me just say that one of the reasons, or one of the arguments that we have been trying to push through UPLAT is that the regulation of the market is something that should exist, and that's something that should exist since the beginning. If there is an e-tendering platform that is supporting the public procurement of a country, which is something that it's a quite relevant activity, because you have the contracts, you have a lot of responsibility for archiving that information to make sure that they are secure and all that stuff. So there should be some regulation on that. Once you have that regulation, you submit those platforms to strict validations related with security, with traceability. So the point of security is the level of security we have in a private regulated market is by far bigger than the one you have in where you have only a state-owned platform, where it is auto-regulated. And everyone knows that auto-regulation is one of the best ways to create failures. So this is the example we have. We have a mix of platforms that combine only private sector. We have countries where we have a mix of state-owned platforms and private platforms. The examples are Spain, are the Netherlands, and we have still a number of countries where we have state-owned platforms that makes it the only place to submit proposals. My experience, my personal experience, initially in the Czech Republic, and eventually I'm realizing that it is happening in Slovakia, is that those are projects that take a long time to implement, cost typically a fortune to develop, much more than what it would be required if if there was a marketplace of private platforms operating, and eventually the level of services does not compare at all with the ones that are being offered by the private platforms. So it seems rather that governments try to reinvent the wheel, because procurement is something that exists in the market for more than 20 years in the private sector. So it's not new. Is new for some agencies in some governments that becomes excited with the idea of creating a new project, a new agency, a new directorate, and eventually they forget that instead of being stimulating the innovation and creating more competition in the public procurement, what they are doing is exactly restricting the quality of those services and reducing the number of procedures and companies involved in public procurement.
Yeah, you mentioned the security reasons. That's, I believe, one of the main reasons why the Slovak government is argumenting as far as the creating the state-owned platforms, a new one, that they would be able to secure all the tendering on the platform. Is there, from your point of view, any risks if there is, because from my point of view, I don't see any difference. I'm sure there are technical ways of how to secure that everything would be transparent and not, if we're talking about terms of data safe and so on, that there are technical solutions for that, and even though if it's going to be run by the private providers, from your experience, was that a problem in, for example, Portuguese or other countries where you were able to see the evolution of the platform when they were creating the platforms? So security.
Yeah, well, the security is if it's not the most important, I would say that it is the most important attribute of the operation of a public e-tendering platform. And for instance, in our case in Vortal, it was, since the very first beginning, it was selected as the most important area where we should put attention, because we realized that if for some reason there was a breach of security in one of the transactions, it would affect significantly the credibility of our platform. But keeping that aside, I would say that we are not in a new market. The topic of the security is something that has been managed by dozens of countries, by dozens of platforms in different circumstances. So, for instance, the private platforms that are operating in the market, they need to comply with certifications that most of them are not applicable to public-owned services. So we have auditing that auditors that every year they go after our platforms, they check all the security measures that we have. They check if the data is really encrypted, if it is accessible. They make very severe tests to check how robust the technology is. So I would say that as of today, in Portugal, after this number of years of utilization, almost 15 years of utilization, there was never one incident where, for instance, someone had access to a proposal that's one of the most serious breaches in security, because that is something that is regularly monitored and audited by different entities, and it's part of the regulation of the country. So a company to operate in the country needs to be subject to external auditing, where they have a checklist, and so we are regularly audited, which is something that a state-owned platform typically is not. So I would say that that's something that today is not new. There is a lot of examples, and if someone has still doubts about that, the best suggestion I can give is to speak with the entities that are managing the public e-tendering in different countries, namely in Portugal, which is an entity that has a long experience managing the certification of platforms, and to check what are the criteria, what are the attributes that are monitored, to make sure that the transactions are completely safe.
We already mentioned some of the pros and cons of having the mixture of the variety of either state-held e-platforms or owned by the private providers. From your point of view, are there any risks or hazards which they should be concerned? If we already mentioned, of course, the biggest one, which is the security. From your experience, what was it? What you were dealing with? What wasn't working? If we go back by implementing.
Well, I can think about a lot of advantages of having different players competing for delivering the best service. I can see new services appearing. I can see better user experience. I can see better tools for the public bodies to launch not only the large contracts, but the ones below thresholds. I can see more small and medium-sized companies bidding. So I can see a lot of advantages. And to honestly speaking, I don't see any advantage of having one single platform operating in the country. Mm-hmm. And more than that, I think that that is something that goes against all the principles that the European Commission has been defending over the last few years, namely the interoperability. Because the interoperability is exactly the assumption where a public body may decide what platform they want to use, and the economic operator may be free to what platform they want to use as well to submit a proposal. So in the international tenders, unless a government decides not to be interoperable, not to allow any other economic operator using a different platform to submit proposals in their country, unless that is the goal, they will have to be interoperable. So that concept of being the single platform in one country is something that over time will break, because we will have interoperability, and the economic operators and the public bodies eventually will decide what platforms are the best ones for them to use. But especially in the supply side, where data will become more and more important, where companies will take advantage of data to be more competitive, to test what are the tenders they should bid or not to bid, they will select what are the best platforms to submit a proposal to a state-owned platform. This is the principle of interoperability that the European Commission wants and is funding for the last few years. So this concept of one single platform is something that in the future will not prevail.
Great. I was going to ask the last question because we run off almost of our time today. The future of the e-procurement and the tendering on e-platforms. And basically you said that. So perhaps a short conclusion for those who are watching us. What is the future of e-procurement, the near future, within you or from your point of view?
I would say that data will be in the top of the list, and the intelligence that we'll be able to take from the transactional data that is being generated over the years, and we will have an ecosystem of private platforms submitting and sharing proposals between them, making the market more dynamic, more competitive, open to more cross-border commerce, and especially for the small tenders. Because in the small tenders, this is where we have 99% of the companies. And when we think about e-tendering, when we think about e-procurement, is not for the multi-billion contracts. Is for the small contracts where we touch the local companies that can definitely see a new way of increasing their business. So this is where we need to focus the attention, and this is where I believe we will have more space to grow in the future.
Great. Thank you very much. That was Miguel Sobral. And today we were talking about public e-procurement and using the platforms for that. Thanks again. Thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoy that watching us. And if you are interested more and you want to hear more, there is my colleague Kristina Kaplanova and our other guests ready for you tomorrow at 2:00 again. Thanks again.